All right, guys. So I talked about this in the last video. Our markets are confirmed in a bubble. Okay. I say this because the biggest indication of all that you are in a bubble is very obvious today. And that indication is when markets do not respond to bad news. Now, this particular bad news is also bad news for the Fed, right? Ultimately, bad news for the Fed. It really has very little, I guess, implied change for the economy. Like the CPI data that we got this morning, just because it's hot doesn't exactly mean the economy is going to be fantastic, right? So you can't even give that to the markets and say, okay, that makes sense why stocks are doing well. No, CPI came in way hotter than expected across the board. This was solid bad news. Solid bad news. There's no way to spin it. This was bad news. That's it. Well, stocks went up. The Nasdaq up 1%. S&P close behind it. The Russell underperformed. This is a bubble, guys. Now, do I think you're like the tech bubble? No. But you're definitely in bubble territory here. Now, what does that mean? It means ultimately this sucker is going to end with a crash that you have not seen since the Rona. This crash is going to be bigger than 2022. I think there's a couple different variables here. Obviously, economic activity. How is the economy going to evolve? If the economy gets worse, gets worse than expected, well, the crash could be larger. But you do have a real problem here. And again, the biggest warning of all for any market and any potential bubble is when markets disregard bad news. Now, I think to some degree, we don't even control the markets. Investors don't control the markets. It's all driven by algos and quants. That's it. So I think they're the ones that are really creating the bubble. I don't necessarily think people are plowing money into the markets, judging off of especially this inflation report that we got today. Take a look at the volume here for the day in the S&P 500 so far. And volume's about 42 million, which is pretty typical to other days. You would probably expect that to be a little bit higher considering today. We got the CPI report that came out. There's still some time left in the trading day, but you're definitely seeing bubble characteristics today. Now, how is this ultimately going to end? Well, it depends. If we go into stagflation, which is low growth, let's call it like half of 1% growth. It's low growth, not quite recessionary, but low growth, and also high inflation. Now, you could, in theory, be, in some kind of recession with high inflation as well. That would also be stagflationary. But that's a little bit less likely because recessions typically cause some degree of, disinflation or deflation even, depending on the severity of the recession. But this is a bubble. Look at the S&P 500. Like today, you went into this report, the CPI report, on one of the most historic rallies you have ever seen in your lifetime. There was more downside volatility when the Fed was printing money and the government was spending it like they were drunk, giving out stimulus checks to anyone and everyone. There was more volatility then than now. It's like stocks refuse to go down. And that's very problematic. Okay, now you also, if you want to be a little bit more technical, you do have a bear flag pattern here. Now, what a bear flag pattern is essentially this, right? When you're just going up in this bear flag, this flag, this uptrending channel here, inevitably you tend to break down to the downside at some point because stocks will always go down during periods of time. And then when you break down, you can see a large move down. And that's what I'm expecting. Now, when does that happen? I couldn't tell you. I have no idea. But I can tell you this is a bubble, and I can also tell you what I would expect to see out of AMC stock when this bubble does ultimately burst in the markets. And I think it's going to be a violent bursting of this bubble. I don't think it's going to be a slow bursting of this bubble. Now, I'll tell you what I'm expecting for when this bubble does ultimately pop. I'm expecting at least a 20% pullback from here. Now, what would that look like in the S&P 500? Well, that would look, that would look something like this. That would take you roughly back to your October, November lows. And that's to some degree without a recession, right? With just kind of recession fears, the overvaluation we see in the markets, the disregard to bad news, all of that catching up to markets again. I think that takes you all the way back to your October, November 2023 lows. Now, if we do actually go into recession, you could see a crash much larger than that. You could see a crash back to your 2022 lows, which in the grand scope of things, which is crazy, would still put you about 7% higher than your 2020 highs, the highs right before the Rona. But from here, if you were to fall back down to your 2022 lows, that would be a drop of about 34%. That would definitely feel like the bubble bursted at that point. Now, what I said in the last video, the reason you know this is a bubble, and specifically today was a clear indication that you are in the late cycles of a bubble, is look at TLT. I mean, when the data came out, this CPI report this morning, which came in way hotter than expected across the board, the bonds responded. The bonds responded firmly, down 1% on TLT. This sent higher your bond yields across the curve. You actually went from pricing in 4 rate cuts yesterday to pricing in 3 rate cuts today. I don't think it gets any clearer than that. The equities are in a bubble, okay? And I don't think it's your fault. I really don't think it's the next guy's fault. I think it's the market makers. I think it's the algorithms, the quants, right? It's their fault. They're the ones pushing up stocks. And then you have mutual funds, you have the BlackRocks and Vanguards that have to get into stocks. The higher they go, the more they have to allocate. It's like a self-fulfilling prophecy to put you in a bubble, right? So I don't think it's any one person specific fault. Maybe you could say Ken Griffin or whatnot, but yeah, you're definitely here. Regardless of how we got here, you're here. Now, what could this bubble popping look like for AMC? Well, it could look really bad, potentially. Down to $1, less than $1 per share. Or it could look something like liquidity gets stretched and, these shorts need their collateral back, so they cover on their short positions in AMC because that's a small relative amount of money, and their collateral could be quite large to be an AMC with the kind of volatility that we have seen in the past for AMC. Now, again, I don't know when this bubble is ultimately going to pop. I expect you'll probably get some reset, some downside coming tomorrow. That would be my expectation, but that's not the actual bubble popping. I do think March 20th is going to be another big event for the markets as we do get the dot plot from the Fed and a new summary of economic projections. The Fed saying they're not going to cut rates at all in 2024, or maybe one rate cut, could be one of those events that the markets maybe are not priced for or not expecting. So that would be the next big catalyst we want to be watching for. But does that really pop the bubble, if you will? Maybe. I wouldn't go out as far as to say that would definitely have to happen, but it would definitely be a possibility. Now let's take a look at AMC stock here on the day today and what to expect in the markets tomorrow if we have any data or anything important. So you do have short interest percentage of free flow at 12.63%, $144.45 million worth of short positions. Days to cover 2.06, 33.13 million shares that are currently sold short. 42.46 million shares that are currently out on loan. Cost to borrow 1.08%, utilization of 59.34, and a short score of 66.58 out of 100. As far as option activity for this week, as I'm sure you already know, it is a big one for AMC specifically. You have about 8,000 calls currently in the money. Out the money calls at about 268,000. In the money puts at about 32,000. Out the money puts at 111,000. So lots of option activity for this week. It's going to make for a very volatile week for AMC stocks specifically. And I think our markets are going to have quite a volatile week as well. Now, you do have the SoftBank ARM lockup expiration today. ARM is actually up about 0.5%. It does not look like SoftBank is selling as of yet, but I really want to give this a couple days to see if we start to get more selling pressure. It's just, they don't have to sell. They might sell. They might dump. You never really know. And that could be another kind of weighing catalyst to the downside on some of your semiconductor companies that could add to more volatility in the markets in this upcoming week, or really just over the next couple of weeks. Nvidia is up 5% today. Yeah, definitely a bubble out there. Okay, kind of insane. And what's actually even craziest about all of this is for core CPI, no bank was expecting this. Not a single one. Morgan Stanley was down here at 0.27%. JP Morgan is 0.28%. Goldman Sachs is 0.32%. Deutsche, I mean, you can see it all right here. That's crazy, right? We came in higher than everyone's expectation. Nobody was correct. Wow. Yeah, that's a bit problematic, I would say, right? A bit problematic, that's for sure. Now, overnight tonight, you are going to get some data out of the UK for their GDP month-over-month numbers, GDP 3-month average, good trades balance, manufacturing production, month-over-month, different data points from them. Some ECB speakers that happen overnight, industrial production, month-over-month and year-over-year out of the Eurozone, but that's pretty much it as far as data tomorrow. You do have a 30-year bond auction at about 1 p.m. tomorrow for the U.S., but that's it. Now, coming out after markets are closed tomorrow night, you will get new yuan loans. Loans in China, outstanding loan growth, M2 money supply year-over-year, and total social financing. So could some of those loan numbers move things a little bit? Maybe, but probably not too much for our market. So tomorrow's actually going to be a pretty, I guess, quote unquote, chill day for stocks. There's not really going to be much of anything happening. If anything, we probably do get a breather to the markets, maybe. Now, today and after hours, you are going to have Clover that reports earnings. Funware, Allbirds, Energy Vault, PHX Minerals, 360 Finance, Guild Mortgage, Purple, and Heron Therapeutics. Tomorrow morning, Dollar Tree, Zim, Arcos Dorados, Petco, Village Farms, Williams Sonoma, Barra Bradley, ADC, Silence, GBLI that will report earnings. And then tomorrow and after hours, you have UiPath, Centennial One, Lennar, EES, V-Room, Generon, Valco Energy, FTC Solar, Anika, and Coin, Quoin. Never heard of that company before. Your big earnings are really going to be on Thursday with Dollar General, Dick's Sporting Goods in pre-market on Thursday. And then you do have Adobe, Blink, and Ulta Beauty, as well as PagerDuty, Smartsheet, and a couple other stocks that will also be reporting. And I believe there's still more companies to go coming next week, I want to say. So I think there's still a little bit of earnings left. But I think for the most part, you're over with earnings. They were okay. Not great. Okay. Your large tech names had a little bit better earnings than your other stocks. But maybe that's partly why we're in a bubble right now. Sentiment today is a little bit lower for AMC stock, as the stock is now down about 2%. Sentiment is at 49. Yesterday, it was at 53, so neutral across the board. Message volume is normal at 58, which is a little bit higher than yesterday's 44. And the participation ratio is high at 55, and that is essentially what it was yesterday as well. So there's that. That's pretty much everything you need to know. 10-year Treasury yield still up about 6 basis points here on the day today. Again, equities not responding at all. That's a clear sign of a bubble right there. Let me know what you think about this information down below in the comment section. Hit the like button as well as subscribe to the channel. Thank you for watching. Enjoy the rest of your day, and I will see you in the next one.